Hello everybody, welcome to another update on the stock screener. Today we're going to talk about agriculture, supply and demand. Because we need to know the background of agriculture when we invest in this sector. Now, where does demand come from? That comes from an increasing population. More population means more food consumption. And also it comes from the behavior of food consumption. For example, Indians are going to eat more food in the future. The same with Africans. Chinese people are going to eat more meat in the future. So all of these different behaviors will have an effect on food demand. And supply, we also need to take a look at that. Supply comes from more farmlands, higher yields, use of more fertilizers. So let's also look at the supply equation on all of these agriculture commodities. So population, this is where the food demand comes from, and it's still rising. And we expect that population will keep on rising in the coming decades. So food consumption is going to keep on increasing. Now, the population breakdown is shown here. And you can see that EU and USA are the smallest parts. And India, China, and Africa are much larger. They are about 3 to 4 times the size of EU and USA. So very important to keep this in mind. And India and China are the same population. So you would expect that they eat the same amount of food. But as we look at the next slides, you are going to see that India eats much less food. So let's take a look at the supply demand chart for sugarcane. And I took this chart because there's something interesting in the news lately that India is going to limit sugar exports. And I can see why, because India is one of the largest consumers of sugar. And they produce a little bit more than they consume, but they are now banning or limiting sugar exports. So I think that their consumption is going to rise. Now, the largest producer is Brazil. So this is Brazil. And when India is going to ban the exports, I think Brazil is going to win from this. So they can take more market share from India. Interesting to know because we are investing in Brazil with Verde Agritech. And other than that, you can also see here that the EU eats a lot of sugar, and China also has a big consumption of sugar. Then let's get on with wheat. So the EU has plenty of wheat. You can see here the EU produces a lot of wheat and consumes less than it produces. So I don't think that there will be a wheat shortage for the EU. But I can see this happening for these countries, these smaller countries. For example, Egypt consumes much more wheat than it produces. So these countries could be in trouble. And they are in trouble because Russia and Ukraine have some supply disruptions. Now, Ukraine is very small. It's just 5% of total wheat production in the world. But Russia could be trouble. And also India India is going to ban wheat exports, and that's a big chunk as well. So this big chunk could be disrupted. And that will probably affect these countries, but less the EU, because the EU is not consuming that much. China, yeah, China could also be disrupted because they eat more wheat than they produce. Interesting to know, Brazil doesn't produce wheat. So this is Brazil, and it's not even on this chart. You can't even see it. So if wheat is disrupted, I don't think Brazil will benefit from that because they don't produce wheat. Okay, next slide, corn. So corn, the largest producer is the US and then China. Brazil also has some corn production. And the ones that eat that corn are the US, China, and then the EU is also a large consumer of corn. Now, what's interesting on this chart is that India, India is this color, and it's just a tiny bit here. And that's interesting to know that India doesn't eat that much corn when you compare it to, for example, China. So this little bar and this orange bar. But we already know that India and China have the same population right now. So why is India eating less corn than as China? So that's something that you need to keep in mind. They eat less corn. Now on wheat, they eat less as well. So India eats less than China. On corn, they eat less than China. And we will see that for soybeans, India is also eating less than China. Okay, so let's talk about soybeans. China is here the largest consumer of soybeans. Interesting to know here is that Argentina is also eating a lot of soybeans and is the largest consumer of soybeans per capita in the world. Now, these soybeans are coming from two countries, that's Brazil and USA, and they are competing with each other to export soybeans to China, and they consume about half of it. Now, the next chart, rice. Also here, you can see that India is consuming less than China. So in all the charts, you see that India is consuming less than China. So I expect that India should increase its food consumption in the coming years to get on par with China. Okay, so rice supply and demand, you can see here that supply and demand is about the same for each country. So I think rice is one of the most balanced supply and demand curves out there. So I don't see any disruptions. There is some talk that India would ban rice exports as well, but I don't see that because India has more rice production than consumption. So they will probably not ban the exports of rice. Also, Europeans don't eat rice. So these are all Asian countries, and the EU is not in it. So they don't like rice, apparently. Some chart on the meat consumption now. And here you can see that Europe and North America are around 5 million tons of meat consumption. But when you compare the population, you can see that China is at least 3 times the EU and 4 times the USA. So I would expect that the meat consumption should be 3 times Europe. So that's 18 million, or 4 times 4 is 16 million. So this meat consumption will probably keep on rising to 15 million in the coming years. And that will have an effect on food prices because meat comes from animals, and those animals need to eat feed and grain. So I think food is going to rise. Also important, Africa, which has the same population as India and China, should also have an increased meat consumption to at least should go at least to 6 to 10 million in the coming years. That's what I would expect, and it is rising. But India is an outlier here. I think they are vegetarian and don't like to eat meat. So this is pretty flat here. You would expect that this should go up, but yeah, it doesn't look like it is going up. But at least China likes meat. It's probably going to keep on rising. So it looks pretty good for food demand. So in conclusion, we know that the world population is growing, so we will have more food consumption, which is good for food prices and agriculture commodities. India's population is the same as China and is 3 times the EU and USA. Yet they eat much less, as you can see in the evidence. So I expect that India is going to eat much more in the future, and that will have a positive impact on food prices. Brazil, they said, the Indians said that they would ban the export of sugar. So Brazil is going to benefit from this ban. EU doesn't eat rice, just something to know. Then we have the soybeans. China and Argentina eat lots of it. Wheat shortage is coming because we have disruptions from Ukraine and especially Russia, which produces a lot of wheat. And additionally, we have Indians who are banning wheat because they need that wheat. They consume a lot of it. Those wheat shortages are going to impact the smaller countries in the Middle East. And finally, meat consumption is rising, and I expect this rising trend to come in for the Chinese and for the Africans. India will probably stay vegan and not see much of movement in the meat consumption. But the other countries like China and Africa will eat more of it. And that will lead to an increased feed for animals. So that's the conclusion. I think that food is going to keep on rising, and I'll see you in the next video.